Good evening and welcome to Houston Public Library series on critical conversations and civic engagement. We do these on an ongoing basis to be able to have great dialogue and discussions and conversations with Houstonians who are very active in their community leaders, activists, educators, all doing great work. Our trio for this evening's discussion is a wonderful group of people who are so involved in many aspects of our community that we're very glad and proud to have them join us here at HPL for this series on critical conversations. Joining me this evening is J. Michael Trevino with Trevino Company Consulting Company, Randi Sonenshein, who is a Jewish activist and educator, and Shariq Abdul Ghani, who is the head of the Minaret Foundation. The three of them combined over the years of their work and activism in Houston has done some great things. I'll let them each tell you a little bit about that. But it's just such an honor to have such an esteemed trio joining us this evening. And our conversation this evening is about Houston together, about our unity, about our work toward our common humanity here in Houston, our common goals and objectives, the collaborations, the relationships that are necessary to make that happen, the ongoing trust that must be developed constantly to ensure that, the transparency and accountability that goes with that to make things happen. And we always start off with the cornerstone of any discussion about these type of topics is always relationships. As we say at the top of the hour, always relationships built on mutual trust and respect, because nothing happens without trust. And so as we enter into these questions and discussion this evening with our wonderful panel, let us be very aware that we're moving down the road to Houston's 200th anniversary pretty soon, 2036. Goals and aspirations for 2036 are being talked about as we speak. What type and what kind of city do we want? How do we want citizens to engage and interact with each other? How do we want citizens to look out for each other? What are the challenges for our common humanity? What are those issues of inequities and equalities and social justice that must be attended to? All those things fit into the discussion about unity. And the state of unity is one of those things that must always be discussed and be talked about in depth, because it means different things to different people. It impacts people differently. It impacts their daily lived experiential realities that are different. So therefore, their concepts and perspectives on the issues are different. That's why it's important to have such a cross-section of Houstonians to talk about these issues as we have this evening. So without further ado, let me start off with the first question for our panelists, and we'll continue our dialogue. Some of it will be the questions that we're going to ask of all of them. Some of it will be a free-flowing conversation and discussion. And so as we always say, when we do these things, we will see where the Spirit leads us. All right, the first question. Within the past year of increasing division and partisanship around the country, what is the one event that reminds you of the unity and diversity alive and well here in the Houston region? Whomever would like to begin.
I'll do it. Thank you, Larry. It's such a great opportunity to be with you, and just wonderful to see you and our colleagues, Shariq and Randy. I'm reminded that just recently, in the last year, my son was working downtown. He works in one of those downtown office buildings, and there was a parade. And there were people going throughout the city, and the parade happened to pass along the parking lot where all these young professionals were standing on all the different levels, looking out, cheering on the people in the parade and everybody else. And someone at the very top level dropped their hat, and their hat dropped all the way down 6 stories to the lawn. And there were people at the lawn who picked up that hat and tossed it to the first level, and from there to the second level and the third level, on and on until it returned to the rightful owner. And I was so struck by that because it reminds me of the so many times in Houston that we have been hit with natural disasters, but those disasters have really given us an opportunity to show the best of us. We know them all: Hurricane Harvey, Rita, Katrina, all these. That's when people really come together because they see each other's humanity. They place themselves in that situation where they may be at a loss, maybe a hat, but it could be a home, it could be a livelihood, it could be a living, it could be a loved one. And I think that that's probably the times that we shine the best. And I hope that it's more often than not.
Thank you, Michael.
That's such a beautiful and touching story. You know, I'm thinking about this question too. And Larry, thank you for inviting me to be part of this together with Shariq and Michael. This is great company to spend the evening talking about these things with. And it's hard to have a universal unifying answer for like the event, right? Because what we think of as something that reflects maybe our identities or who we are isn't always shared. So even things like 4th of July, fireworks festivities or the rodeo or things that can seemingly be really unifying sometimes pull out this kind of charge of, where I feel included or where I don't feel included. I find, for moments for me where I see unity come together tend to be in gatherings around the arts. So, going to see Hamilton earlier in the year, I felt the swell of just all of us feeling, this unbridled joy and, the arc of humanness all there. And I'm still aware that there's plenty of people who aren't there in the hobby theater together with me, or for whom that's outside the sphere of like, what we do. But I think it's within kind of these moments, and each time I can find a way, and the arts work really well for me, going to something at Miller Outdoor Theater or parks, of kind of getting into community, that I feel reminded of all of the possibilities to find some intersections with other families or other people who at face value, we may not have a lot of overlapping experiences in our day-to-day.
Thank you, Randy.
And I'll echo Randy's comments. There's not one single moment that's inspired me or has been the aha moment. There's two moments that I'll give. One is just seeing how everyone came together around Harvey, right? And then before that, there was Rita. And then during Winter Storm Uri, and these natural disasters, these cataclysms, these issues seem to bring all of Houston together. But in terms of something that's non-disaster related, but is somewhat still of a disaster, is the issue of Melissa Lucio, who sits on death row today, right? And what we've seen legislators from all over the state, especially here in Houston. We've seen Representative Thompson, who's a Democrat. We've seen Representative Hall, who's a Republican, amongst many others as well, come together and advocate in a very bipartisan fashion for a stay of execution, right? It's the first Hispanic woman in the state of Texas who is set to be executed in just a short time. She's from South Texas, but you see people from all over the state advocating for, and they're doing it in a very bipartisan fashion.
I think that's a great example, Shariq, that we are able to cross lines and boundaries, and we are hopefully slowly moving to purple, away from this entrenched red and blue reality, and talk to each other more as whether one's a conservative, a liberal, or moderate, or progressive, and without all the other labels and party labels and all that other nonsense, because in the end, it's about our common humanity. I'll just talk about the two that have given me hope real quick. One was the march in Houston after George Floyd's death. To watch that many people come together of all races, of all age, of all denominations, of all, you name the label and the title they were all there together in a very peaceful demonstration for peace and justice. And then most recently, the dedication of the Joe Compass Torres Plaza, where over 1,000 Houstonians showed up. And that truly, again, was the diversity of the rainbow. Asians, blacks, Hispanics, whites, you name it, everybody was there. Elected officials, religious leaders, we all came together for one reason. And I think those are the things that show me hope that Houstonians can come together, have a caring heart, have the empathy that they need to understand each other's plight, and begin to move the needle forward. And I think it's going to take that kind of work going forward for us to do it. So let me just step into the next question. What is the one step we can all take to ensure that there is unity and understanding of conservative, liberal, moderate, progressive, and to move beyond this partisanship on all sides? What can we do? What's the steps can we take toward unity?
I'd like to jump in and provide like maybe an out-of-the-box suggestion. I think the best way, or one of the key ways that we can promote unity, is simply by inviting folks on both sides of the aisle to break bread with one another. right?
Yeah.
It's something that's rooted in all of our faith traditions, right? Just breaking bread with one another, learning about one another, our children, our hobbies, our difficulties, maybe our debts, maybe our job histories, just about who our makeup is and what drives us every single day. When we learn about one another, it's much harder to, when we humanize one another, it's much harder to hate one another, to disagree with one another in a very strong and knee-jerk fashion. You know, all too often we allow talking heads and media personalities and others really in the community to determine the course of our relationships with other people. We've seen this happen with different religious groups. We've seen it happen with different community groups, but we also see it happen with political groups where people on the outside say and determine what are the boundaries of your relationship. And if you cross this line, we will no longer support you. But I believe our policymakers and people affiliated with our policymakers really have to go out of the way and establish some level of courage to reach across and say, hey, let's go out for some Italian food or some Pakistani food. And I just want to know who you are as a human being.
Thank you.
You're next, Randy.
Oh, okay. We have an order to this. You know, I think Shariq.
I'm buying time.
No. It's all good. And Shariq, I want to be sure that I'm saying your name accurately. Is that fair, Shariq?
That's perfect. That you've said it perfectly. It's just like you said it, just like my mom would say. Thank you.
Amazing. Of course. You know, I agree with what you were saying, and it sits really well with me. And I want to take it kind of a step more kind of internal and kind of private, which is when I show up in places and when I'm trying to be active, when I'm trying to engage with other people, I'm always trying to remind myself first, and this makes me feel more empowered, that I get to choose what I pay attention to. Yeah. So when I think about driving unity, you know, like where my focus is going to go, where I'm going to spend my calories, that the opportunity sits with me, and I sometimes have to slow down and not just allow myself to be bombarded with everybody else's messages or, you know, different agendas, and just be deliberate around, you know, what do I expose myself to? And sometimes where I don't have the capacity even to make engagements, where it feels scary, you know, to bridge divides that aren't as familiar for me. I'll lean into like reading a book, you know, with different characters, or watching something, or just kind of finding ways to turn my attention to something that I otherwise like wouldn't be in my immediate or even a couple of concentric circles away, you know, of my concern. And that helps me orient myself to try to think about, you know, I hold ideals about unity, and I want to align my behavior as much as I can to it. So my best sort of advice on it is to keep my own control and power over what I give my energy to, and what I turn towards, and what I might turn away from that I shouldn't.
That's really good. Let me bring it back to the example that you started with, Larry, the demonstrations following the murder of George Floyd. You know, my experience is that it typically is one or two people who do this, and who's top of center for me right now is Chief Art Acevedo, walking with the demonstrators throughout the city. And then at one moment, he took a knee. And that simple act of taking a knee, I'm of the belief that wherever you bend your knee is a church. And so when I saw him take that knee, and I knew that my son was somewhere in the crowd, it just struck me as an opportunity to see that he expressed, one, the respect for life that we should have, not just for George Floyd, but for each other. Two, the opportunity to demonstrate to people that he is a man of faith, and any loss of life diminishes us all. And three, even as a public official, he risked it all by bending a knee. And yes, he took criticism, but at the end, that prompted other people to do the same. And what a beautiful sight for everyone in communion taking a knee throughout the downtown city. And I think that that's the kind of thing that we need. And I just love that about spontaneity, but it does take one or two individuals to be that spark that kicks it in.
Yeah.
Michael, I think one of the beautiful things about when Chief Acevedo took the knee, apart from just a terrific de-escalation technique of meeting the crowd where they're at, he showed an enormous amount of empathy, an enormous amount of empathy and grace. And he was, again, able to meet the people where they're at. But by showing that empathy, what he inadvertently said was, I'm not above you. I'm not better than you. I am you. I'm with you. I'm the same as you. I'm at the same level as you. And we're in this together.
And if I may, Shariq, the fact that he was wearing a uniform, I thought made it even more impactful. Thank you.
Well, actually, what we're talking about are values, so let's talk about that for a moment. What is the one value you believe that in this quest for unity among the issues that we're all facing and dealing with, from the perspective, again, of the moderate, the conservative, the liberal, and the progressive, what is the one value that you think we all share that will allow us to deepen our sense of unity? And this is being taped today on the week after probably one of the great unity moments in the religious world of Ramadan, Passover, and Easter coming all together at the same time, which I thought was a really interesting perspective. What is the one value? Because it always comes back to values. What is the one value you think that holds up the strongest, or should be held up the strongest, to allow us to actually come together?
I would say love, love of humanity, love of country. I know people in their own political belief, their own political compass, think that they're acting in the best interest of the country when they advocate one policy or another. To me, it's sometimes the unintended consequences, the collateral damage, intended or unintended, I think is what is hurtful, and what I think keeps people from being able to stand up and agree to talk to someone else. I have a very close friend, a dear friend, who's been very, very successful. I'll call him Jim. He has my polar opposite politically, but I speak to him all the time. We text all the time. And I have never questioned his patriotism. I've never questioned his love of community or love of family. And I think by doing that, he allows me the opportunity to continue to talk to him, just as I give him the opportunity to talk to me. And that always helps me. I'm able to understand that. At times I'm frustrated, but the love of community, love of country, and love of family is what allows me to do that.
Thank you, Michael.
A value that I feel would bring people together is love of our children. So I'm gonna take Michael's concept and take it a little bit further, but love of our children. What more do we want than safety for our children, good health for our children, great afterlife, great connection to God, great education, great healthcare. The interest that we all have in common is the love of our children, and coming together for the sake of our children. If we can center our children's future or our grandchildren's future, I'm not there yet, but our children, our great-grandchildren's future, if we can center them in our lives and say, how can we make America better for them so we can leave America better than we found it? I think it is an easy, or it's a common denominator between all of us, despite whatever religious differences we have, whatever community differences we have. We can all agree on our kids to be happy and successful.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. These are beautiful answers, and I think the one that I would add in would probably be fairness. You know, I was thinking about we were talking about George Floyd's killing and the protests that ensued, and I remember trying to explain to my 7-year-old, right, at the time, like what she was seeing on the news and how to make sense of it, and like, how do your parents feel about this? And the something I felt like was sort of universal, that or at least kind of could resonate with her, was this idea of like being treated fairly. You know, like, how do people feel when they're not treated fairly? And what does it mean that some people aren't treated fairly? And what does it mean when you're in situations where things are unfair? And that seems to be, you know, something we probably can all examine our own stories, you know, and find those times. And there's just sort of shared hurt around, when unfairness sort of prevails in our lives. So that's like my short answer. But Larry, can I give you a little bit of a longer answer to it? I want to push back on the question a little bit, because I agree with the common values that we said, and I'm hoping that I didn't trigger anything by using fairness as my example. But in the particulars of each of the answers I heard, there were things there that have a little hair on it for me. Like I bristle a little bit at like, well, what do you mean by patriotism, or what do you mean by the afterlife, right? Kind of a thing. And the question goes deeper to me when we take it to the layer of there's a common abstract idea that we have, that we all agree on, and then how we manifest it. Like we might all agree on these things, but what does love look like, right? What is fairness like? What does love of children look like? Some versions of that could be repugnant to me, potentially, like at an extreme. So I think it's really interesting to find a degree of common ground, right, or shared values or bonds that come from that, and then try to explore and go into these layers of, well, to me, doing right by my kids means pushing them super, super, super hard, whereas that might be super off-putting to someone else. And then trying to kind of explore and being okay with, at the end of the day, some of those differences, and having space for, like, my version of absolute truth may not overlap even all that much with someone else's, and there's room in the world for both of those things.
Well, let me see if I can wed a couple of things together out of that, because I kind of agree with the different perspectives that were shared. I think the challenge is, just to substitute a few words, when we talk about love our children, the challenge is to love all children. And what the phrase you hear increasingly in certain sectors of Houston are, those are not my children. And it's so interesting when I hear it. It's not mean-spirited. It's not necessarily even meant to be ugly. It's not racist in a sense it is. It's about fairness, because they don't see it as equality or equity. It's a total disconnect. There's a certain segment of our society, I think, that takes no responsibility for children that are not theirs. And that it is important that we understand that that's kind of where it is. That's really where it is. And so how do we get people to understand fairness? And I always say equity comes with empathy and caring and loving all our children, and that they're all our children. They're our future. We keep saying that. But yet we don't behave that way many times. What can we do? What can be said?
Well, I didn't know it was this kind of show. So now that I know what kind of show it is, I mean, for me, one of the things that we had talked about is that I don't think that values are always positive. And it concerns me, because some people pursue a particular value and a goal that's connected to it at any cost. And sometimes it's at that cost, right? It's at the cost of somebody else's child. And I know that Shariq works on a program where there are no kids in cuffs. Some people are okay with watching kids get cuffed, so long as it's not their kids. And I think that the important thing is to expand it the way you have, is that love all children, not just my children, but love all children and behave accordingly.
I think it's interesting, Larry, you sort of talk about, what effect it has when we don't have everybody in our circle of concern, right? When there's like exclusions or boundaries that are around that, and how is that nefarious or not when it happens? And another explanation I kind of want to throw into the mix is why I think that happens sometimes is because it's very easy for us to each feel like we're on precarious ground ourselves. That our legs aren't fully underneath us within our own lives. I got to watch out for mine because of how shaky the world is, and I'm not sure I have capacity, to widen my circle. And that to me is a rationalization, right? But I do think there are forces at play that want us to feel more precarious than maybe we really are. And absolutely, there is real suffering and there are real struggles, and I don't mean to minimize or deny them. But when there are people, you know, who have access to resources and means, people like me, who somehow are getting message that, you know, we're in very precarious times and moments, like we're not, and there's much more that we can and should be active in doing. So I feel like if the layer of fear can, like, just the temperature can be taken down on that, the expansion of like how we are and the ways we interact with each other would then let us involve ourselves in all kids' community in much wider ways than we do.
And what is the basis of that fear? And where does that fear come from, arises from, if yet we still talk in terms of unity, of community, of we all must take steps toward developing a system that works for all children? Where does the fear come in? I'm always, when people use the word fear, I'm trying to think, is it fear of losing something, of something being taken away from someone to give to someone else? Is it a rational fear? Is it an irrational fear? Is it based, where does the fear come from?
So I don't want to hog.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you want me to kind of lay out my thought on it? Is that fear comes from buying into this story that we're in a fixed world with only, you know, so many opportunities and resources to be divided between us. And there's scarcity all around us. And so, you know, there's only so many spots at elite universities or whatever we tell ourselves the prize is, you know, for our lives or for our kids. And I think when I can adopt a sense of like the world is abundant and the world has opportunities for lots of people to win, lots of people to thrive, lots of people to flourish, this kind of clawing at a more finite prize, like moves out of the center of my view, and the fears dissipate.
So I'm waiting for Michael and Shariq to jump in here. So the inequities and inequalities that exist will continue because you can't have a discussion about social justice in a fear-based society because it never will go anywhere. So I'm trying to figure out, as I'm working toward unity, there's the steps that you all have touched on, and I'll just paraphrase. Human beings were not meant just to survive or thrive. Human beings were meant to flourish. Correct. It's all about human flourishing to the fullest of their God-given potential.
Yeah.
How do we ensure that that basic right, because it is a right, to flourish to the fullest of your potential is given to every citizen, to every child? And that's not happening today.
Yeah. It's also not happening. Go ahead.
No, how much of that is we have to actually believe it? Because what you're saying, Larry, sounds terrific and wonderful, and I agree with it wholeheartedly. But don't you have to believe that? Don't you have to internalize that? Don't you have to live in an environment where they encourage you to flourish, encourage you to do more than just survive, encourage you to flourish? I lived in a neighborhood when I was younger where it was really just about surviving, getting off the bus, making sure no one jumps you, making it home, hanging out with a very specific crowd of people. And for me, you know, middle school and portion of high school was just surviving. It wasn't about flourishing. How do you get people to believe that?
Yeah, I think flourishing comes about when you have caring and loving parents that have the resources. And I'm not suggesting that it doesn't happen in most families, but I think a fear comes from being the fear and threat of losing something. I think that this is what drives many people. They're afraid when they see, and you qualified and said citizens. I don't just look at citizens. I look at all human beings that are in the confines of this country. And you've got people coming here historically, have been coming here from all parts of the world. And one of the things is that when another person comes up and all of a sudden the majority starts breaking the balance and it's no longer a white majority. Now we're talking about minority cities, minority states, and people start fearing that they're going to end up losing out because they were not able to achieve middle class. They were not able to purchase a home. They were not able to get the job that they wanted. And so all of a sudden, this fear that I'm going to be denied something because other people are here. And so when they see other people here, all of a sudden, it gets to be candid about it, extremism. I think one of the biggest dangers for us is extremist views. We're the polite view of civil society. It'd be great if you could get a representative of an extremist like the Proud Boys to come and talk. I've encouraged the Proud Boys on social media, volunteer to go to Ukraine. They look for someone over there. Don't be shooting here. I've done my bit. I've served in the military. My brother did too. My uncles did too. And so my view is a little different. So when I speak of patriotism, I speak of standing up for my country's values, those as I understand them. And I mean, I'm both born here and an immigrant. I came here when I was 8 years old. And so I have a deep appreciation for the advantages and benefits that this country has provided and that my family has facilitated. And so I look at trying to make that available to as many kids as possible.
Thank you, Michael, for that. Shariq, something else you want to add, or Randy?
Shariq, I can defer to you, and then, or I can.
No, please go ahead.
You know, I'm listening to this, and it's very real. I mean, Shariq, your experiences in middle school and high school, like that's real, right? And I listen to it, and it's easy to feel cynical, right? And it's natural. I think it's kind of a natural thing to do, to kind of harden around some of this. Where, as I was listening, where I kind of felt this like glimmer of hope inside me is I come back to, I know that we are really flexible. Like that is part of the human condition. There's like a million different ways to be a human and a million different ways to, culturize different things. And we're super resilient. So, thinking even to these, hard experiences, and I think Shariq hit it on the head, like you have to kind of believe it. There has to be the possibility of a different way can come to be, right? Like school doesn't have to play out this way. Our family doesn't have to go through these patterns. My neighborhood doesn't have to, right? And then some degree of mobilization around bringing to life, this vision of how we want to interact together and how we want to be with each other. So it takes enormous effort, right, and sort of dedication to it. But I really was kind of gripped, Shariq, by your point of, do we have to believe in it? Because that to me is the well, of sort of resolve to keep coming back to. Like, I do think it is possible to live in an abundant world where all the kids are doing well, where I can reject ideas like we have to rank and file 7-year-olds according to their abilities. Like all 7-year-olds can be awesome and good at lots of different things, right? And not necessarily factor into the way, like what is normal, as things play out right now can shift and can change. And the ingredient for that, I mean, I heard Larry talk about empathy, is without showing recognition that there's a place for everybody in it, that all of us have legitimate space to take up in this world. Like, I don't think there's a chance to get buy-in for it, but I do think, I hope I don't sound too idealistic, but I do believe in possibilities.
Well, in this COVID-19 reality world we're living in and the stress that has created, even this past weekend, I was talking to someone yesterday whose family got together for the traditional big Easter Sunday dinner with the extended family, and the discussion around the table broke down because of the divisions and the relationships and the issues and the feelings passionately about the issues and the situation we're in this country, and those people and those children and the minorities and the immigrants and all the things that's wrong and people taking sides on the issue. And even within families, let alone in the larger community, the divisions that are there and the depth of the passion around those divisions seems to have grown and continue to grow because we all listen to different stations and different sources of our information, and we believe what we receive from those sources. And so even within one's own family, it is difficult to have those conversations, let alone in the larger community. How do we begin to talk about these things and create an environment that allows us to have these dialogues and conversations with even within our own families and the larger community? And is there hope to do that in such a divisive environment right now?
Well, I grew up with two brothers and two sisters. Go ahead, Shariq.
No. You started off with, I've got several brothers and sisters, so I want to hear what you have to say.
No, you don't. I grew up with brothers and sisters, two of each. And my older brother and I were mortal enemies every day. And so we always fought. And my mother, after she spanked both of us, would remind us that you may not like him, but he's your brother. And so, as we've aged and continue to talk, I mean, yes, there are times when we have to set up a different text group to exclude one member of the family because she doesn't particularly want to talk about that. And we respect it. And so whatever age, I may not like her political views. I may not like her sentiments on some policy issue or something. But at the end of the day, she's my sister. And I have to do that. And I do that with friends. I say that, the reality is that in Houston, my friends are my extended family. And so I treat friends as brothers and sisters and respect their views. I may not like them, may not agree with them, but I respect the views, and it will be they who will walk away from me. I won't walk away from them.
Thank you. Good point. Shariq?
I was at Lifetime the other day, or not the other day, right before Ramadan. I was at Lifetime working out, and I was in the locker room, and there was a gentleman there. He was African American, and he looked a little different. He dressed a little different, and he had some kind of a symbol around his neck, something that I've never recognized before. And I was intrigued, but I was afraid to ask him what that symbol meant, or who he was, or what his beliefs were. And as I was putting on my shoes and getting ready to go to the pool, I sucked it up. I turned around and I said, "Hey man, I see this curious pendant around your neck. Could you tell me what it's about?" And I created a friend who I've had coffee with on numerous times since that day, just to learn. It turns out he was Rastafarian. And I had no idea about their belief system. I had no idea about who they are. In a long-winded way, what I'm trying to say is, I think we have to draw courage from within ourselves to be able to ask each other the hard questions. I think what we'll find more often than not, that they're not actually hard questions, that they're easy questions. We just make them out to be hard questions, but the person who we're asking wants the question. They want to have conversation. They want to have dialogue. We just have to have the gutso and the courage to be able to get over and conquer our own fears and extend an arm across the aisle and say, "Hey, I want to learn more about you." And we have to show curiosity.
Thank you, sir.
I relate strongly to what you guys were both saying. I have 3 brothers, Michael. So like we have inflicted lots of harm on each other, physically, emotionally. And yes, at the end of the day, we're family. And I try and extend that. I play this mental trick sometimes where when I encounter people, I think that was somebody's baby, because I know the incredible well of love I have for my kids. Kind of ties to Shariq's very early point. About a shared value, and reminding myself that that person was somebody's baby, reminds me of that. So I think Shariq, your point really sits strongly with me too. This idea of like reaching out and asking questions. What's really hard for me, I find, is revealing things about myself. So I'm from a culture that can sometimes lean towards being a little bit insular. I have 4 grandparents who all survived the Holocaust, and if you spend a lot of time with survivors, as I did as a kid, they kind of come in 2 varieties. There's the families that will talk and the families that will never talk. And so I've kind of internalized, like, don't share much about yourself, keep things to yourself. And when Shariq talked about building, that relationship with the Rastafarian friend, for me, I struggle with bearing like a certain openness about what's more intimate within me, which I know serves to help us come together. But I sometimes feel that rush of like exposure to let someone see, like the weird and the kooky and sometimes even the ugly, in my family and my tradition and background.
That's cool.
Those are all excellent comments. As we seek this unity, let me just go to this last question. What do you see happening in Houston that gives you great hope, great aspirational hope of things happening and changing, that you're beginning to really see some of the veneers, some of the barriers come down, some of the hesitations perhaps go away, to help people come together more and more? Are we getting it right? Are we doing things that seems to be moving the needle in the right direction? Is there work to be done yet in certain areas? Are there glimmers of I guess I'm always looking for those glimmers of hope. And hope for me is an action verb. Hope doesn't just come. You got to take steps to make it happen. So do you see things happening in that direction?
So I'll kind of start this one off. In the racial reckoning, right, that we're experiencing, and there's a lot of false starts, and there's a lot of insincere efforts that are out there. But where I actually feel hopeful with some traction is there's many forums it happens in, but I hear the question being asked over and over of what is the role of in driving equity? And sometimes the fill in that blank there is, what is the role of the business community in driving equity? What is the role of philanthropy and endowments in driving equity? What is the role of education? What is the role of all of our religious institutions? Giving some voice to exploring that role and having kind of self-scrutinizing conversations feels hopeful to me. It feels like a willingness to engage that may not have been there as much before, but it also feels like it's a call for accountability, right? So like, what is the role of academia? Because we each have this part to play, and the bare acknowledgement of it and a breaking of silence, even if in those forums there's usually like a third of the room that I feel like doesn't see it as a problem or necessarily thinks it should be done, but they are in the room somehow, or they're not the majority of the room, and it's a question being explored. That gives me a starting point.
Thank you, Randy.
Shariq, do you want to go?
No, I want you to go first.
Okay. Well, I'm less excited about companies, corporations designating and announcing that they have a DEI officer, someone responsible for that. I'm old enough to remember when there were minority set-asides in the 60s, when there was EEO, later on affirmative action, later on corporate social responsibility. Now it's DEI. And so, corporations they respond to the environment in which they operate. They respond to the consumer base. They respond to political winds. And I really like the way that you put it, Randy, in terms of these things are coming about, and some people react to it in different ways. Corporations, companies try to make a point that they too are involved. I look at equity differently. I look primarily at inclusion. I look at inclusion not from being part of it, but rather having your issues addressed. Philanthropy, yes, you should fund these types of programs because those programs will lead to people being included. And for me, inclusion is recognition, and recognition is part of empathy. We know you exist. We know you have needs. We know that we can help you with those needs because that's our charge. That's what we do with the money. And so the word that comes to me as I'm winding this up is what Larry said, is hope. It's an action verb. I'm very optimistic. At the end of last year, I was voted to join the Anti-Defamation League board, and I couldn't be more thrilled by it. Shariq and I have been members of the Coalition for Mutual Respect for many years, and I love that. So for me, the hope is I want to continue to find opportunities to be included, to be part of something that I'm not now part of. I love connecting people. My daughter helped me design my business card, and it was just a bunch of little geometric dots. And I said, "Why that?" She says, "Because that's what you do, Dad. You connect people." And I love that kind of opportunity and the privilege to connect other people to each other, because invariably something good is going to happen of it. And it's just like, I wouldn't do it in a gym. You're braver than I am. It's just like Shariq, approaching a man who turned out to be a Rastafarian, and you made a friend. And so I'm optimistic and I'm hopeful because I want to be there. And so I'm making myself available. As I said, I'm not the one who's going to walk away.
Thank you,
I
Mike.
shouldn't have gone after you. That was a big mistake. I should have talked first, and then you could have. I was going to say the same thing about inclusion, and I'll keep mine short and sweet because I echo a lot of your sentiments, Michael. But when I see people of different colors, faith traditions, races, and executive positions, and board positions, and advisory positions, when I see them on athletic teams, that gives me a lot of hope. As a minority myself, as a Muslim, when I see Muslims in acting roles at the Houston Theater, when I see Muslims in the Houston Symphony, when I see Muslims, frankly, at the Whole Foods checkout, it feels like, wow, we're growing as a community. It's like we're take a page from Larry's book, we're flourishing. We're hitting every sector, and this is terrific. But it's not just us. We're seeing members of other communities as well, being included in the leadership of the city, not just in the civic side, but we see it in the business side as well.
Thank you, Shariq. We're about out of time, so I'm just going to stop here and thank you all. J. Michael Trevino, Trevino and Company, Randi Sonenshein, Jewish activist and educator, Shariq Gandhi, Minaret Foundation. I couldn't think of three better people to come together to have this discussion with this evening, so I want to thank you all for being part of this. Just a few closing comments to recap a little bit. One of the words we heard a couple of times this evening is relationships. And I think it is that hallmark of the cornerstone of moving this agenda forward toward unity. Relationships built, nurtured, and maintained on mutual trust and respect, because nothing happens without trust. And the easiest way to develop those relationships is what we've talked about. Take someone out, break bread together. You got 3 opportunities every day: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I used to say you had 4, which was happy hour, but we don't do that one anymore because that's not popular. So you have 3 opportunities left. So, but really it's important because nothing takes the place, and COVID has put such a dent in that. Nothing takes the place for face-to-face, and you all know this, face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball content. I want to hear the tonality inflection in your voice change. I want to see the expressions on your face change as we talk. I want to talk to you about your family, about your kids. I want to learn about you. I want to talk about you, what you have passion for. I want to see when we talked about certain issues that passion arises within you, sitting right there across from me as we're breaking bread together. All of that is important in the development of those relationships. The other piece, I think, is to always keep in front of us that wonderful quote from James Baldwin: not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until we face it. Yeah. And I think that is part of the dilemma of our society, of our country, of our nation, of even our community. We don't want to face and admit certain things. Yeah. And until we're able to have that dialogue, and to be able to have that dialogue, we have to do what first? Create a safe crucible, a nurtured, safe crucible where people feel respect and honored and not attacked. And that you can have that conversation because you've uplifted the safe crucible. And I'll just end with this wonderful thought, because I think it really comes down to all of us as community leaders, advocates, change agents, whatever word we want to use, to be born into a world that does not see you, that does not believe in your potential, that does not give you a path for opportunity or a clear path for education. And despite this, to be able to see beyond the world you're in, to imagine that something can be different. This is the job of a prophet. It is a rare prophet who not only imagines the new world, but also makes that new world a reality in his or her lifetime. I think we all need to be that prophet. I think we all must aim and seek to be that prophet in our own lives, in our families' lives, our community lives, in the world and nation's lives. Because I love this last little quote from Leonard Cohen. After a deeper searching of the heart, we all now rise to play a greater part. This is heart work. It is not head work. It is not cognitive. It is affective work. It is heart work. And heart to me has always meant helping each achieve real tomorrows, helping each achieve real. If you say you care and you love and you have heart, then you are called to help that person achieve real tomorrows in their lives and for their family. Again, thank you all for being here. It is so great to be part of this ongoing critical conversation dialogue. I'm Larry Payne, and on behalf of the Houston Public Library, we thank you. Until we come together again next time, be well, stay safe, and we'll see you for the next critical conversation.
God bless you all. Stay well.
Thank you all.
Thank you.